Today I would like to invite you to listen to the Dhammapada of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the 124th verse from the Buddhist scriptures on the YouTube channel Thien Thai in the USA. If no wound there be in one's hand, one may carry poison in it. Poison does not affect one who has no wound. There is no ill for him who does no wrong. This verse teaches the profound principle that ethical purity and right action protect the mind and heart from harm. In the story related to this teaching, there was a young monk who traveled through villages teaching the Dharma. One day he was offered a cup of poisoned water by a villager who wished him harm out of jealousy and misunderstanding. The monk accepted the cup but did not drink from it. Instead, he smiled and reflected quietly, understanding the nature of harm and the mind's power. Because his mind and body were disciplined in ethical conduct, the poison had no effect upon him. He had cultivated mindfulness, compassion, and restraint, and he had not indulged in wrongdoing. Just as a hand free from wounds cannot be harmed by poison, the mind and heart free from evil, unwholesome intentions, and wrongdoing remain, untouched by the harms of the world. This story illustrates vividly the Buddha's teaching. Those who act with virtue, refrain from harm, and cultivate ethical integrity are naturally protected from the consequences of evil, whether subtle or overt. The principle contained in this verse emphasizes the importance of cultivating moral integrity and purity in all aspects of life. When one refrains from unwholesome actions, the mind becomes like a hand without a wound, impervious to poison. Evil, harm, and suffering cannot penetrate a mind that is disciplined, virtuous, and steady. The monk in the story exemplifies this understanding. Though external circumstances included the offering of actual poison, his ethical cultivation, mindfulness, and inner purity shielded him naturally from harm. This teaches that the root of protection lies not in external circumstances, but in the cultivation of virtue, ethical restraint, and the avoidance of wrongdoing. The disciple who practices in this way develops natural immunity to the effects of unwholesome conditions, for the mind, grounded in ethics and clarity, does not create the causes that lead to suffering. The verse further emphasizes that harm arises not from external circumstances alone, but from the violation of ethical principles. Poison, harm, and misfortune can touch those who harbor wrongdoing, unwholesome intentions, or unethical actions, because their own minds create vulnerabilities. Just as a wounded hand allows poison to enter and fester, a mind tainted by greed, anger, or delusion is susceptible to the consequences of suffering. By cultivating restraint, mindfulness, and ethical integrity, the disciple prevents such wounds from arising. The mind becomes fortified, serene, and resilient, naturally protected against the subtle and overt effects of evil. Ethical purity is thus not only a moral discipline, but also a practical method of safeguarding the mind and consciousness from harm. In observing this teaching, one realizes that the path to protection and freedom from harm is through consistent ethical practice. Every thought, word, and deed carries potential for creating either purity or defilement. When the mind is trained in right action and mindfulness, it remains untouched by the suffering that arises from wrongdoing. The monk's example shows that even when external circumstances are dangerous, the internally cultivated mind, free from unwholesome tendencies, remains uninjured. This teaching encourages the disciple to reflect upon the importance of moral vigilance and to act with care, attention, and awareness in every situation. Each small act of restraint, each moment of ethical reflection, strengthens the mind and heart, ensuring that poison, harm, or misfortune cannot take root. The story also teaches patience and equanimity. When confronted with potential harm, the monk did not react with fear, anger, or resentment. He remained calm, aware, and compassionate, understanding that harm has no effect upon a mind free from wrongdoing. This calm awareness arises from consistent practice, disciplined attention, and ethical living. The disciple who cultivates virtue develops the capacity to respond wisely to life's challenges, seeing clearly that suffering arises not from external factors alone, but from unwholesome conditions within the mind. By acting rightly, refraining from harm, and practicing mindfulness, one transforms vulnerability into protection, fear into clarity, and suffering into insight. Furthermore, this teaching illuminates the interdependence of ethical action and the mind's resilience. When one avoids wrongdoing, the mind is naturally strong, clear, and undisturbed by external difficulties. The metaphor of the wound and poison illustrates that external threats cannot penetrate a mind that is ethically pure. The disciple who practices generosity, patience, compassion, and mindfulness creates an internal state of protection where clarity, joy, and insight naturally arise. Over time, repeated ethical cultivation strengthens the mind's capacity to remain unharmed, even in challenging circumstances, ensuring steady progress on the path of Dharma. The Buddha also teaches that this protection is not magical or external, but a natural consequence of ethical living. Just as a hand free of wounds cannot be harmed by poison, the mind that is free of wrongdoing, unwholesome intentions, and ethical negligence is naturally unaffected by harm. The disciple who avoids greed, anger, and delusion, and who cultivates mindfulness, compassion, and ethical vigilance, experiences this natural immunity to the consequences of evil. Life's difficulties, challenges, and dangers lose their power over the mind because they cannot penetrate the ethical integrity and moral clarity that have been developed through disciplined practice. In practicing this teaching, the disciple learns to cultivate awareness of both subtle and overt actions. Harm may arise not only from visible wrongdoing, but also from subtle unwholesome intentions, careless speech, or distracted thought. The Buddha's analogy reminds the practitioner to examine the mind carefully, observing the roots of thoughts and actions, and to maintain continuous ethical vigilance. By doing so, the mind remains uninjured by harmful conditions, and the seeds of merit and awakening grow steadily. Ethical practice thus becomes both a shield and a foundation for deeper insight, wisdom, and liberation. The disciple also recognizes that avoidance of wrongdoing is intimately connected with compassion and care for others. Just as poison can harm the body, unwholesome actions can harm others and oneself. Ethical integrity and virtuous action protect both the mind and those around us. By cultivating right action, the practitioner nurtures a field of merit, kindness, and ethical protection, transforming life into a living expression of Dharma. Awareness of consequences, careful reflection, and mindful restraint become natural and continuous, like a steady river flowing in the direction of wisdom and compassion. Through consistent practice of ethical vigilance, mindfulness, and restraint, the mind naturally develops clarity, resilience, and serenity. The metaphor of the wound and poison illustrates that protection arises from within, from ethical cultivation, and from a disciplined heart and mind. The monk's example teaches the disciple that even in the face of danger, harm cannot affect one who acts rightly, refrains from wrongdoing, and cultivates ethical integrity. This principle encourages patience, careful observation, and continuous cultivation of virtue, ensuring the mind remains strong, clear, and ready for the natural unfolding of insight and awakening. The 124th verse thus conveys a profound, gentle, and practical teaching. Ethical integrity, restraint, and mindfulness are the true protection against harm. By living with virtue, avoiding wrongdoing, and cultivating the mind carefully, the disciple is shielded from both subtle and overt dangers. Life's challenges, difficulties, and external threats cannot penetrate the ethically cultivated mind, which remains serene, steady, and clear. The gradual accumulation of virtue, combined with consistent mindfulness and ethical vigilance, ensures the natural unfolding of insight, compassion, and joy, allowing life to become a steady path toward awakening. The disciple who reflects deeply on the 124th verse of the Dhammapada realizes that ethical living is both a shield and a source of strength. Just as a hand free from wounds cannot be harmed by poison, a mind cultivated with restraint, mindfulness, and compassion is naturally protected from the consequences of harmful actions, suffering, and misfortune. The monk in the story exemplifies this truth through his calm, compassionate, and wise response to the offering of poison. Because he had not indulged in greed, anger, or delusion, his mind remained pure, steady, and undisturbed. This teaches the disciple that protection is not found in external circumstances, avoidance of the world, or reliance on fortune, but in the careful cultivation of virtue and the diligent practice of ethical conduct. When the mind is disciplined, every thought, word, and action aligns with Dharma, and harm, like poison, cannot penetrate. Ethical vigilance requires both awareness and proactive practice. The disciple must observe subtle tendencies toward greed, envy, hatred, or delusion, just as a healer observes the first signs of illness before it spreads. By recognizing the arising of harmful intentions, one can prevent them from manifesting into actions that lead to suffering. Each moment of restraint, reflection, and careful consideration becomes an opportunity to preserve the purity of the mind, cultivate merit, and strengthen moral integrity. Over time, this consistent practice creates a mind naturally resilient to harm, where ethical discernment becomes instinctive and the heart remains compassionate, clear, and steady, like the monk whose hands and mind were untouched by the poison offered to him. The teaching also emphasizes the interconnectedness of ethical action and personal well-being. Just as poison can only harm a wounded hand, external difficulties, danger, or malice only affect a mind that harbors unwholesome tendencies. Those who act with greed, anger, or malice cultivate vulnerabilities within themselves, opening the mind to the consequences of suffering. Conversely, those who practice generosity, patience, compassion, and mindfulness cultivate a natural protection, rendering external circumstances powerless to disturb their peace. the disciple who internalizes. This teaching understands that the source of both suffering and protection lies within, and that ethical cultivation is the most profound and effective means of safeguarding the mind. Mindfulness is central to this practice. The disciple learns to observe the arising of every thought and intention, discerning which are wholesome and which are unwholesome. Just as the monks' careful awareness protected him from physical poison, mindful observation and ethical discernment protect the mind from subtle defilements that can grow into suffering. By continuously cultivating restraint, patience, and compassion, the disciple maintains a mind free from the wounds of greed, anger, and delusion, ensuring that the natural clarity, joy, and serenity of the mind remain intact. Ethical vigilance, practiced moment by moment, thus becomes both a shield and a source of liberation. The Buddha also teaches that the avoidance of wrongdoing is inseparable from the cultivation of positive qualities. A mind free from harm is not merely passive. It is actively engaged in the development of virtue, compassion, and wisdom. The disciple who refrains from unwholesome actions creates space within the heart for wholesome qualities to flourish. Just as a hand free from wounds can safely carry nourishment and treasure, a mind free from wrongdoing can fully embrace the fruits of ethical practice, the accumulation of merit, and the deepening of insight. The gradual, steady cultivation of virtue becomes a natural flow, protecting the mind and nurturing awakening. Patience and equanimity emerge naturally from ethical practice. The monk in the story did not react with fear, anger, or resentment when faced with poison. Instead, his calm, composed, and compassionate awareness reflected the depth of his ethical cultivation. Similarly, the disciple who practices mindfulness and restraint develops a mind that remains steady amid challenges, resilient in the face of difficulties, and compassionate toward all beings. Ethical integrity thus creates a protective field around the heart, ensuring that external harms, threats, or provocations do not disturb the natural clarity and balance of the mind. This verse also illuminates the subtlety of moral protection. Harm often arises gradually, like poison seeping silently into a wound. Small indulgences in unwholesome thoughts, careless speech, or subtle ethical negligence can accumulate into profound suffering. The disciple who cultivates continuous awareness, reflection, and restraint prevents the formation of such vulnerabilities. Each moment of mindfulness and ethical action is like tending to a wound before it festers, ensuring that the mind remains whole, healthy, and protected. Over time, this practice transforms ordinary life into a steady path of ethical vigilance, clarity, and insight, allowing the seeds of awakening to grow naturally. The disciple also learns that ethical living is inseparable from compassion and care for others. By avoiding harm and practicing virtue, one not only protects oneself from suffering, but also reduces the potential for harm to others. Just as poison can spread through neglect or unawareness, unwholesome actions can create suffering beyond the self. Ethical vigilance and the cultivation of restraint, patience, and compassion ensure that the disciple's mind remains clear, while also contributing to the well-being of all beings. Through the repeated practice of ethical action, the disciple gradually cultivates a heart naturally inclined toward kindness, empathy, and equanimity, forming a living embodiment of Dharma. The teaching in the 124th verse further emphasizes that true protection arises internally rather than externally. Weapons, threats, or external dangers cannot affect the ethically cultivated mind, just as poison cannot affect a hand without wounds. The disciple who refrains from unwholesome actions, cultivates mindfulness, and develops ethical integrity naturally develops resilience and serenity. Life may present challenges, temptations, or difficulties, yet the mind remains unaffected because the causes of suffering, greed, anger, and delusion have been restrained and purified. Ethical cultivation is therefore both preventive and transformative, creating the conditions for insight, compassion, and liberation. Through continuous practice, the disciple gradually internalizes the principle of this verse. Mindfulness, ethical restraint, and compassion become second nature, naturally guiding every thought, word, and action. Life transforms into a continuous field of practice, where each moment offers an opportunity to cultivate virtue, prevent harm, and nurture merit. The mind, free from the wounds of wrongdoing, remains serene, steady, and resilient, naturally protected from the subtle and overt consequences of unwholesome actions. Ethical vigilance, practiced consistently, becomes a source of joy, clarity, and awakening, ensuring the gradual unfolding of wisdom and compassion in every aspect of life. The Buddha's teaching reminds the disciple that the ultimate protection and freedom from suffering arise from the cultivation of virtue, ethical mindfulness, and restraint. External circumstances may be unpredictable, yet the ethically cultivated mind is naturally shielded. Just as a hand free from wounds cannot be harmed by poison, the mind free from wrongdoing remains uninjured by the conditions of the world. By refraining from greed, anger, and delusion, cultivating patience, compassion, and mindfulness, the disciple nurtures the seeds of awakening and safeguards both mind and heart. Life becomes a steady journey of ethical practice, merit accumulation, and insight, where the mind naturally attains clarity, serenity, and liberation. Thank you for watching my video. Namalamat Ba. I wish to bring this merit towards all disciples and sentient beings, all of whom will attain Buddhahood. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your time.